Good evening, everyone. Bonjour. My name is Louisa, and I'm the Director of Programs here at Wakan Tipi Gabby. I'm so happy to be moderating this evening's Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar. Our plant relative we're highlighting this evening is the acorn or oo-tah. So we're really excited to have you all here today, and we're so glad you're taking the time this evening to join us. Before I begin, I also did want to go over some housekeeping of this evening's webinar. We are recording this session and we'll be posting this recording on our YouTube channel, as well as we're live streaming on Facebook. So if you want to go back and rewatch it, in case you miss anything, please don't hesitate to do that. We also have our ASL interpreter here tonight, Angela Blackdeer, who is Santee, Dakota. And apologies if she's not on our Facebook Live, but she will be on the recording. In addition, there's also live captioning enabled here for those of you joining us via Zoom. At the bottom of your screen, you should see show captions, and you can turn that on. I know for me, I love seeing the little subtitles at the bottom of the screen. Helps me process because I'm more of a visual learner. Also wanted to mention we will be sending out a survey after this session, so we'd love your feedback. We're always trying to grow and improve our programming. So if you could please submit that, we would appreciate your feedback. And then I also wanted to thank the U.S. Forest Service for partnering with us on all of our Gifts of the Plant Nation webinar series. And so without further ado, I want to introduce some of our I guess, panelists or our speakers this evening. And so for first up, let's see, just wanted to make sure the slides are functioning. 1 second. Thank you for your patience, everyone. There we go. Yay. Thank you, Claire. Our behind the scenes communications manager is helping with all of these. So yes, we have 3 speakers this evening. First, we're going to hear from Ella Robertson. Then we'll hear from Jenna Grey Eagle, and then we'll hear from Gabby Menomin. So I'll introduce them along the way. But first, we'll hear from Ella Robertson, who's Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota. She has a master's degree in tribal administration and governance, and is an adjunct faculty at Sisseton Wahpeton College, as well as has her own business called 13 Moons, where she sells traditional foods. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to her.
Good evening. Thank you for the awesome introduction, Louisa. As she said, my name is Ella Robertson. I'm from the Sisseton Wahpeton Dakota. My Dakota name is Tate Harina Jiwi, stops the wind woman. I'm an adjunct faculty at the Sisseton Wahpeton College. So currently I'm teaching traditional plants and herbs, which this is the second semester that a tribal member has been teaching that class. So I was really honored. It took a little while, for the reins to be handed over to a tribal member, which I was pretty excited about that. And I tried to have as many knowledgeable tribal members come in and help with the content in class, kind of sharing that space, but just acknowledging that I don't know everything, and that there are others out there that have knowledge as well. And I'm always happy to share that space with others. So I put in my introduction that I am a learner, a teacher, mother, grandmother, artist, dancer. So I'm a lot of things. I have a lot of irons in the fire. But I'm very proud of my 4 children that I have, and I have 3 grandchildren and another on the way. And I really feel that, having children's really helped me to grow, and um and it made me want to learn more, because I wanted to share with them everything that we learned, when they grew up. Uh
Ella, are you still there? It looks like you muted
Oh,
yourself. There we go.
sorry. I pushed the space bar. I was trying to move my slide.
Good one.
I don't have control of the slides. So I found an amazing picture on, it was a food sovereignty page, and here it is with some an example of some of the traditional tools that we have. There's a wampum shell there, some grinding stones, and I feel that a lot of tribes have that in common, is that, we have special stones that we use for tools, and we still use them today. My uncle has a 100-year-old, geez, it has to be like 120 years old now, but grinding log with the original, um I don't know what you would call it, masher, and it's been in his family for a really long time. And it's amazing, that our people, even though we still have modern conveniences, that we still sometimes, those old stones work better than, the blenders and processors. So you can go to the next slide. So there's a couple of pictures I wanted to share, um some samples of myself. There's that very first picture. I'm in the Sisseton Public School. They had asked me to come in and share about traditional food. So I tap maple trees. And so I shared some of the sugar with the students, and they're really surprised by the flavor, and and it was like candy for them. And one that I don't have pictured here, the first time that I shared with the K through 5 students at Tioshbazina Tribal School, which is a different school than the public. I did the K through 5, and so I said, everybody put out your hand. I'm going to give you a sample of the maple sugar. And they put their hands out like this. And then after they each got their sugar, then I said, well, go ahead and eat it. And so they went like that. And one of the older ladies, the Kushi, she laughed and she's like, oh, look at the kids all look like they're taking communion. So, and to me, that was really special because it considering all the hard work and the knowledge, the work that I had to do to gain that knowledge, it was very special. It was we consider a lot of our food sacred, and so that just seemed to symbolize all of that. That second picture there is my grandson and my daughter in the background. And so when they're really little, even, we give them tools and we try to show them how to identify the plants, what we're digging, and that type of stuff. So that was out in the early spring. That third one there is another community gathering with the youth. And so they had put up a teepee and they asked me to bring my foods in. So I did, and was sharing with the students there. And me and my daughter gathering up there in the top right hand corner. And then the bottom, that's my very first traditional plants and herbs class. And I had 21 students, and that was the biggest class of the semester. So that was pretty exciting. Okay, you can go on to the next slide. But in the first slide, it says sharing knowledge ensures that it's carried on. And I feel that that is so important, because we came from, a lot of tragic history. And here I have reservation life had a huge impact on our food systems. We are still feeling this impact today as we search for knowledge that has lain dormant for a long time. We are reclaiming our traditional foods, our names for them, and bringing them back into our homes, to our families and tribes. And when I was gathering information for this presentation, I was finding that a lot of our elders, who are roughly around 80 something right now. I'm 50, so the elders that I'm speaking to are around 50, and they have little to no knowledge of acorns. And what the knowledge that I have has been gained from going to food, actually it was going to food sovereignty conferences or other conferences where they're serving our traditional foods and the chef and the people are talking about how the foods are prepared and the process and getting them ready for consumption and how to harvest and those types of things. It wasn't from my own elders. And so that's why I feel like reclaiming that knowledge for ourselves is so valuable and important. And so, I had talked with one local elder named Vine Marks, and um, he's one of the treasured elders that works with the language program. And he said, well, I think I remember my mom mentioning something about that. I'll look in her books. But I I'm a lover of books, and I'll be honest to say that um I've gained a lot of knowledge from books, archaeologists and various historians that gathered information, back in the 16, 17, and 1800s and documented those things have been very valuable in reviving a lot of, and even supporting the knowledge and traditions that we had. Um, because we're taught certain things and sometimes it isn't completely true. So let's go on to the next slide. So food sovereignty is so important. There's various organizations, blogs, YouTube videos, conferences, meetings, trainings, social media, all of it just provides so much information. I did at the very end of my portion of the slides, I have resources where there's like 2 videos. I mean, but that's just a start, because if you look on any of the various social media venues, there's Facebook or there's TikTok, there's always short videos that show informational things that really spark an interest for people, and YouTube videos, have more in-depth content. So, when you're researching things, you know, using and things, and it's been a more recent movement. 2010 was the first time that I attended a food sovereignty conference. And I was just telling my class this year, I was like, what really moved me, I was like, was they had a table of vendors. And one of the vendors, that had a very large display was Navajo Pride. And they had beans, cornmeal, different types of products there on display and for sale. And I'm like, here are the Navajo out in the middle of the desert growing all this variety of stuff. And I'm like, myself, my tribe, we are in the middle of farm country and we're not farming a single acre. And so it just really made me think about, the capacity for farming and growing food for your people. And so during our one of our meetings, and it was I believe it was like our closing banquet. One of the chairmen got up and he was doing a speech talking about his tribe's advances that they had made in farming and agriculture, growing cattle are, because now it's everything, it's greenhouses, farming, um, some even do coffee and they have cattle and they have honeybees and they try to cover all the bases. And what he said in there was, a nation cannot call itself sovereign until it can feed its own people. And to me, that was so simple and profound at the same time, because that really is what sovereignty is all about, is being able to determine your own destiny, and food has a lot to do with it, even though we take it for granted that food has a lot to do with our survival. So I just wanted to share that much about food sovereignty, so we can go to the next slide. Um, Traditional ecological knowledge. I was not familiar with this term until I started teaching my traditional plants and herbs class. And I looked at some of the PowerPoint presentations that the previous instructor had left, and this was a big part of it. She made it a big part of each module that she taught included traditional ecological knowledge. And I'm like, well, what the heck is that? So I had to look it up, and I'm like, oh, that's just really putting a label on what we as tribal people, nations, what we know. And we don't always, I feel like in the midst of it, we don't always define what it is, that we don't give it a label like traditional ecological knowledge. But it's knowledge of the rivers, the lands, the plant life and the terrain, all of that. Um, and we put it all together. And for us, it's mostly just survival. It's what we're doing to survive. But now they have this fancy term, and um, I think back on some of the research that I did, when I'm gathering information for various foods, because when I first started out giving presentations, it was just, oh, these are the foods that we eat. And I had a lady come in, she worked for community education program, and she said, well, what's the nutritional value? If I'm going to eat this, what kind of nutrients is it going to give me? How is it going to benefit my body? I'm like, oh my God, you know, uh, I don't know, but give me a chance to look it up. I'll get back to you. And so then it was each one. I started looking up the information on each one, and my mind was blown because I'm like, oh my gosh, I was eating these foods all this time, and I didn't realize what it did for my body. So I'm sharing some of that here in the slideshows, but what um what really makes it valuable, I feel, is when we have scientific data or research that backs up the information that we already knew. And that's I feel what we need to share more. It kind of validates how we know. And I know that when we talk on spiritual things, it can get a little touchy, but like today, we watched a wild ricing video, and at the very beginning, she said, I asked, did we have songs for gathering wild rice? And she had to go to another tribe. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been on that journey before. I know how that feels. I'm there. You know, I shared the creation story of corn um, with my class, and in it said that we had a green corn ceremony. And I'm like, I've never even heard of that. And how do we go back to doing that? Where do we find it? And um, I look to my spirituality. I look to our ceremonies and prayers to help me reconnect and find those things, because I feel like that is what makes us different, is because of our connection to Mother Earth and the importance of our foods to us, that we have that very valuable piece, our prayers, our offerings, our songs, our traditions that go along with that food. It makes it whole. It's not just about, eating these foods to survive, but it's all the whole cyclical part of what food is about, and harvesting and planting and preserving all of those things, and acknowledging and giving thanks to the Creator and to Mother Earth to providing those things. So um that's kind of, it's not in a nutshell. That was actually a pretty long speech about traditional ecological knowledge, but it it's a term that's kind of used a lot lately, and so I just wanted to share my take on it. All right, next slide. So here's an example of an oak tree. This is bur oak is the most common one. I was gonna upload a picture. I just couldn't seem to take a good enough picture of the oak tree, but being able to identify um number one, where are you gonna find oak trees? Number two, once you find a patch of trees, how are you going to know which one is the bur oak? And some identifying factors are, well, number one, you look at this and it's really branchy. A lot of trees like say ash or basswood or maple, they go up, they're straight, they have a few, some branches that come out like this, but this one you can see it goes all over the place, kind of like I don't even know how, like say veins, you know, they go all over the place. And the bark is a definite way that you would identify the oak tree, but also the leaves. They're very different from the other leaves. I can't see because my little pip is taking up my corner here. Okay. But that top one, I just took, that's what our leaves are looking at like right now. They're red. Some of them are still a little bit green, but they're a nice red color, and they have like lobes looking structure on the leaf pattern. You can look down on the bottom right, and see it's very different from what other leaves look like. Okay, next slide. And anytime we're working with our traditional foods, I'm not gonna lie, it's hard work. It's there's a lot of steps. There's, having to actually get out of your house, get out of your yard, and venture someplace else to gather and collect the things that you need. So I feel like as a parent or a grandparent, it's always nice to start your kids out early learning these things so that they anticipate that you're going to be walking for a long distance, or it's going to take time. You're not always going to be successful finding what you're looking for. So prepare them for disappointment so that they don't get frustrated by that. There's a lot of valuable lessons that happen while you're out gathering foods. Number one, learning, well, diligence, because if you're not used of being out in the wild and walking, pushing yourself to be able to walk, maybe it's miles to find what you need, getting through the brush, or because it's not going to be all mowed nice if you're out in the wild. Number two is persistence, because like I said, you're not always going to find it right away. Maybe you might misidentify a tree, and you have to go further on to find other trees. But being persistent, being patient, because you're not, you know, sometimes you might come upon, what you're looking for right away. But if you're new to it could take some time. Being patient with just the process, but also with yourself. If you're learning something new, you're not going to be an expert right away. It's going to take time to become familiar with the different leaf patterns and with your environment, but also, how to harvest. And I think that's about it as far as lessons for the moment. Okay, next slide. So processing acorns has multiple steps, and it's hours or days. And in this picture here, there's the acorns there on that cutting board and some inside that glass bowl. So my cousin Charlie shared this with me. She had attended a food sovereignty conference. I believe it was with the Potawatomi tribe. And so herself and her daughter had got to go out and go through the experience of processing acorns all the way down to the making flour. So those are some of the tools that they made. Here they have, it doesn't look like ash. I don't know what kind of wood this is, but I worked with one when I was at I think it was Indigenous farming conference. They had made us, or they didn't make us, but they asked us to volunteer, various volunteers from the group to come in and make corn mush. And so we used a hollowed out log similar to that with these big, long, heavy pounding posts that we would put, smash up the corn to make like a porridge type of stuff. So it's really exciting seeing these different tools. And like I said, though, at this point in time, we don't have any of those here at Sisseton Wahpeton, but all it takes is us, wanting to do this and recreating these things for ourselves. Next slide. So the very first part after you gather together all of your acorns, you gather your acorns. The one thing that I've had forgot to mention is the timing. So you're looking around August, and each year it's going to vary. Usually there's things that like say one of the first things that you might harvest in the summertime. For us, it's the wild turnips. And so once we do wild turnips, then it kind of sets the pace, because sometimes it'll be like that last couple weeks in May. Sometimes it's all the way till the mid of June or maybe the end of June, like this past year was kind of later in the year. So it seems for me that was always like a marker of how things were going to go. Okay, it's a little bit late or a little bit early, but being able to check. So when the acorns are on the tree and if they're still green, and maybe turning a little bit brown, but the little cap on them, if you twist and it comes off of the tree, away from the tree easy, then you know that it's ripe. If it takes a little bit longer and you have to really work on it, then they're not ready. But once you collect them and you can set them out in the sun, because the weather's nice by then. As long as it's not raining, keep them dry. You can always keep them inside and give them that time to dry out, but it helps them to separate from the shell. So after that waiting period, a day, a couple of days, then you want to soak them. So acorns are full of tannin, which gives it that bitter flavor. So when you're getting them ready and you're washing them, I saw one video where the lady had used a little bit of baking soda, and it was for her, she was doing piñon nuts, but I imagine, because they're sitting down on the ground and, probably there's some, scat or, some poops on the ground. You want to make sure that they're nice and clean. So maybe adding a little bit of baking soda, rubbing them on there. So when you have them in the water, you're going to see that a couple of them float to the top. Those are the ones that are no good. So you can pull those out. If you see ones that have holes with weevils, if you're collecting ones from the ground, those also you're going to want to throw out, because the weevils would have gotten inside of the nut and it's not going to be any good. And once you get them all washed up, you're going to put them in, a container of some sort and cover them with water. And so this is where we're talking about it taking kind of a long time, because you can, this is more of the cold water process. And there's also, my cousin Charlie was talking about doing the hot water method. That was where they had did it out at that food sovereignty conference. And she said that they had used hot water in the leaching process and it went a lot faster. But she was concerned about the starches. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. But in this one, doing the cold water, you could even take, like say a mesh bag and put all of your acorns in that and put it in a creek, somewhere where there's fresh running water, until the water runs clear. So basically what the leaching process is just getting those tannins out of the acorn. So tannins cause it to be bitter. It can upset your stomach because it's hard to digest. So not a real good experience. As kids, I'm sure maybe some of you are guilty of it too, seeing an acorn out there when it's green like that and then just trying it out. I did. And so I got to try some of those bitter tannins myself. Next slide. Um, so shelling the acorns. So in the video, you can kind of see Erica's there. She has a rock and she has two rocks together, but that's what she's using to help break open the shell of the corn. I mean, the shell of the acorn. So after you get them all shelled, as you're shelling, some of the suggestions that I saw was to have a bowl of water there, because of the high starch content. You know how potatoes, when you peel them and they turn brown, or apples, they turn brown. But if you put them in water, then it'll keep them from turning that brown color. So that was one of the suggestions, was to put it in water as you're shelling them so that you keep them a nice white color. Um, and I was just looking at her tools there. Some of the ones you can use, like a meat tenderizer or a hammer for breaking open those hard shells, or a nutcracker. My brother was saying, well, aren't hazelnuts similar? So, and I'm like, I didn't go down that rabbit hole to see like how similar they are. Okay, next slide. So once the acorns are all shelled, and um, you want to smash them down, and you can use like a mortar and pestle, or you can use the flat rock, um, or if you have a blender or a food processor, that is also handy for um, getting them pulverized and mashed up. And once they're mashed, then you want to cover them with water, like small, a third acorns and two-thirds water. And if you cover it with cheesecloth, and this is where there's a lot of different variations in how to do this. The one individual, they had like a 3-day long process where they had it in a container, like say like an old pickle jar or a plastic version of that, and covering it in water using the cheesecloth, and you strain out the water and then put in new water and do that for 3 days. And you want the cold because you don't want it to ferment, if it's in warm, like room temperature. Um, and we had one individual that used just cheesecloth, and they just rinsed and rinsed and rinsed until the water was finally clear. So that's when you're, if you have a limited amount of time that you can spend on this, and you just want to do one full day or more, you can rush the process. So, and do a little more modern techniques. Okay, next slide. So once you get the acorn mush down, you can bake it put it into the oven and bake it on warm, and it's going to take a few hours. You want to open it up, but you don't want to close the door all the way on the oven when you're cooking it. You can put like a wooden spoon or something in there to hold it open so that the moisture escapes. And I find that, because I used to do that with my yellow corn, as I was processing it, I would stick some into the oven try and speed along the drying process, as I was getting it off the cob. Um, but that's to how you would dry it out so that you would make it ready for making flour. And it's not going to be really fine, and when you cook it up, you can make mush with it. So once when I did corn mush out of my hominy corn, I added June berries that I had got from my aunt, and I used my maple sugar for sweetener. So acorn mush can be prepared that same way. And also in pancakes. So coincidentally, today in my class, we had blue corn pancakes. I like to, you know, uh, have a little something to eat when we're in class because I feel like if we use all of our senses, it really helps us to internalize everything that we're learning. So then you're using all the senses, your sight, your smell, your taste, your hearing, even your touch, as you're eating that food, you're utilizing all of those senses. So, um, I feel like that's the best way is, trying it for yourself, making this acorn mush and trying it out. So, next slide. Food is medicine. So when I'm teaching, when I do various presentations, a lot of the participants, they want to jump ahead and I want to learn about medicines, and I want to learn how to, make different things, and I appreciate that want to learn. Um, but I feel like it taking a step back. Well, first, let's talk about some of the preventative stuff or the food that we do every single day. How do we incorporate these traditional foods into our diets and, looking at the benefits that they have for our bodies, that we don't realize how many of our traditional foods are the medicine that we need right now. And I feel the more that we're educated about it and the more that we take it seriously, well, I'm not just gonna watch this webinar, I'm gonna go out and actually try it and incorporate some of these foods into my diet. So it's good to gather information, and I feel sometimes it takes a leap of faith and probably some courage to go out and gather and to process and do these things. And I grew up in the country with horses and stuff, so I'm a cowgirl. So courage was never lacking. So anytime I wanted to do something, boy, I just charge ahead. So I never really struggled with that, but I find that the more that I present and talk with people, that it's a challenge for some, because you're stepping out into the unknown. And that there's all kinds of people that are learning these things and that are open to share. I know my cousin Charlotte, when she's out talking in the community and people are really anxious to know. Um, they want to know. When she's more open to, teaching about the medicines and things like that. And but she knows a lot about the foods too. And I feel that that's what every community needs is somebody there to really help, hold people's hand while they're learning about these things. So I encourage you to do it. Take that first step. Okay, next slide. So tannin is what turned the water brown when you put the whole acorns into the water and you're soaking them for days and days and days. It has a really dark brown color. Um, and surprisingly enough, it's a medicine. It can soothe burns and rashes. It speeds like any open sores that you have. It helps speed up their healing process, reduce inflammation of burns and pain. So myself, I suffer from arthritis. Um, and I'm happy to say that, I haven't had a flare lately, which I totally, give credit to my outdoor activities and the different foods that I'm eating that really help with that. And, um, we suffer from a lot of various aches and pains and disease that um, really make our life, the quality of our life, um, it takes it down, so we're not living our best lives because we're dealing with these everyday aches and pains or various things. And we look at what just the simple, the wastewater really is what you kind of think of it when you're soaking those acorns and you're going to throw it away. But look, it's got all these benefits to it. And they also used it for a natural dye. Okay, next slide. Look at this laundry list of nutrients that acorns can provide for our body. And to me, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like a superfood, like the first time that I tapped maple trees or tapped maple trees. And we're eating the sugar and Elder was telling me about the benefits of it and against diabetes and stuff. And so then I got curious. Well, I wonder if the interwebs, has that information on there. So I Googled it, nutritional value of maple sap, and it looked like this. There's so many commonalities in what sap and what acorn can do for you. It contains water, provides your body with energy, protein, healthy fat, carbohydrates, calcium, iron, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, zinc, copper, manganese, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, um, pantothenic acids, vitamin B6, and folate. And as we get older and we have things going on with our body, we become more and more familiar with what these nutrients, what we need in our body to help it function better. And surprisingly enough, when COVID was around, they were pushing a lot of zinc and manganese and magnesium, potassium, those types of nutrients for our body to help prevent and to help it fight off COVID. Um, and so, look here, even this food would have really been help for us during that COVID time. But even today, I mean, look at it. It gives us protein that's not from a meat, healthy fats and carbohydrates, those things that are good for our heart, calcium for our bones, the I don't know how I want to describe them, but the Westerners, when they came, wondered how can our bones be healthy when we don't drink milk? And it's because of our foods. It's a good source of calcium and iron. Magnesium, phosphorus, potassium. My aunt had some really low blood pressure and was having issues with her heart, and it was because of low potassium. And here is an amazing supplier of that. So, okay, go ahead, next slide. So what does it do for my body? It protects the heart, it boosts our energy, improves digestion, regulate blood sugar levels, build strong bones, growth and repair, soothe inflammation, eliminate diarrhea, and it's also good for skincare. Next slide. So some of the other things that I didn't put on the slide was like our fiber. It showed that it is high in fiber, which provides the things we need for good digestive health. And right now, they're contributing so many of our diseases to our gut health. And, I think that acorns would be amazing in helping this along. My son was doing apple cider vinegar and lemon juice shot every morning. And mind you, he was only 15, but he was reading about how your gut health has to be in good order in order to keep yourself healthy. And so he took it upon himself to do these apple cider vinegar shots every morning. Um, and it was, because of the information that he got on digestive health, but it also helps to eliminate constipation, diarrhea, irregular bowel movements, cramping, bloating, and other gastrointestinal issues. So that's really hugely beneficial for us. Diabetes, a study by the Journal of Ethnopharmacology showed that the acorn seed extract had various healing effects on complications caused by diabetes. The fiber and complex carbohydrates found in acorns are the reason for this benefit. So that's another plus for anyone that's struggling with diabetes, or maybe you're pre-diabetic. This might be something that you want to include in your diet. Heart health, it has 5 times more unsaturated fat, which brings your cholesterol into balance and prevents obesity and other conditions that threaten heart health. So some really amazing nutritional facts there. So I put here outsource. I just wanted to give an example. Like, you could totally buy um, from Etsy. It has some examples there, 4 pounds for $39.99. And I didn't see how much the other ones are, but I imagine that there's probably other people from other tribes that gather, that you would be able to purchase acorns for. Say you live in the city and there's limited amount of oak trees or bur oak, or are you just, busy working? But you still want to include it in your diet, there's an opportunity there to purchase. And even on the right-hand side there is acorn flour for 1 pound is $54.35. And I believe that was also on Etsy. But I encourage people to buy native and buy local if you're going to outsource. Next slide. So here's a couple of videos. We're not going to show them right now, but they're there for you if you want to look at them. Some various videos on processing acorns. That second video there is actually one from 1933 that I found, and it shows her going through the process of gathering her acorns, leaching and roasting them. So it was pretty interesting find. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Ella Wahpeton, and thanks so much for sharing about yourself and all of your knowledge. I really loved learning about that holistic perspective of what oo-tah or acorns gives us, as well as how to harvest and process them. I think we all needed that encouragement to take that first step. So thank you for pushing us. I'm
Awesome.
also I'm also really jealous of your students that they get to eat your food in every class. So thank you so much. If for those of you who are joining us via Zoom webinar, you can, and if you have any questions for Ella, there is a Q&A at the bottom of your screen where you can start to put your questions. If you're on Facebook Live, we will be checking the comments and we'll try to get to all the questions if we have time. Otherwise, you can always send follow-up questions to info@wakantp.org. But now I want to turn it over to Jenna Grey Eagle, who is one of our Wakantipia staff. She's our environmental justice and stewardship manager, also Oglala Lakota, and she's going to share more about how to buy native. So Ella mentioned that, and also some nutritional benefits and recipes with us. I'll turn it over to Jen.
Can you see me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, there I am. Okay. Hamada kiapi washichu ia Jenna Grey Eagle amakiapi Dakota ia na pe matowi mieye oyate mitawa king Oglala Lakota Sioux. Good evening, everyone. I am Jenna Grey Eagle. My family is Oglala Lakota, and I'm the Environmental Justice and Stewardship Programs Manager here at Wakantipia Waiagapi. And yeah, Padamayaye, or thank you so much to Ella. I really respect your work and all that you do for your community, and I know how much you inspire others, even here in the Twin Cities, to really reignite our traditional food pathways. And I really appreciate you being with us here tonight. And I'm really excited to be talking about the nutritional benefits of oo-tah or acorns with everyone tonight and share a little bit more about recipes and such. There are almost 450 species of oak trees worldwide that produce acorns, and I think like 90 native species in our country alone. So the amount of options of getting to know acorns are really numerous, and I've gotten to know acorns more so in my adulthood. But I especially love the fact that it's such an abundant species, because everyone, whether you're urban or rural, can get to know acorns and utilize them. But first, we can go to the next slide, please. But first, we can discuss the nutritional benefits of acorns a little bit more. Now, the exact nutrient profile is slightly different depending on what species of acorns we're talking about. But all are packed with really essential nutrients, as Ella was talking about, and generally the same across species as far as nutrition is concerned. But they're especially high in potassium, iron, vitamins A and E, and they're also really low in calories. So this chart is based off of just 1 ounce of acorns, and 1 ounce contains only 144 calories. There's about 2 grams of protein in 1 ounce. There's about 9 grams of fat, really healthy fats. There's about 15 grams of carbs, 4 grams of fiber, and it's really especially high in vitamin A. So that's for the reference daily intake, the RDI. So 1 ounce will fill 44% of what you need in a day. And then vitamin E, it's about 20% of the RDI. And then iron and manganese, it's about 19%. And then potassium and vitamin B6 are about 12%. And then it also has folate as well. And there are over 60 beneficial plant compounds in acorns, including catechins, resveratrol. Sorry, that word's a little hard for me. Resveratrol, quercetin, and then gallic acid. And these are all just really, really potent antioxidants that can help protect your cells from damage. And the picture on the right-hand side shows some green acorns. And so green acorns indicate that they're not ripe and they're not ready to eat, especially because green indicates that they're really high in tannins still. And tannins are a huge reason why people have kind of stepped away from eating acorns or utilizing them. Right, we always hear about how acorns are poison and don't eat them, or like those are for the squirrels, like, right, that's the narrative that we usually hear about acorns. But it's actually relatively easy to soak tannins out of acorns, relatively, because it is a very labor-intensive process, but it's not necessarily like equipment heavy to get rid of the tannins. So even though tannins have some really good topical and external benefits, as Ella was talking about, and they have been used in dyeing leather as well, consuming tannins can be an irritant to your digestive tract. So, and not only do they make acorns extremely bitter, but it's mainly feared because they're an anti-nutrient, meaning that they reduce your absorption of certain food compounds. And so tannins have been linked to certain cancers, and they can cause liver damage if they're consumed in really high amounts. So it's important to know how to remove them, which I will share more about in a bit here. I know Ella talked about that in a little bit as well. But if you're interested in foraging and prepping acorns, always check with your doctor or medical professional to double check. They are technically a tree nut, so if you're allergic to tree nuts, then don't eat acorns, or check with your doctor if you can. And then some people do report a little bit of nausea, stomach pain, and other digestive complaints when they first start eating acorns. So it's suggested to eat just a little bit first and then work your way up to more, especially if you enjoy the flavor. But overall, acorns are packed with really healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, and plant compounds. They're really good sources of vitamins A and E. They're loaded with fiber and antioxidants, and they have several benefits, including improved gut health and a lower risk of chronic illness. And if you go to the next slide, please. So if you're looking to harvest acorns, as I said before, there are so many different species of acorns, but the good news is that all of them are edible. But of course, some are more preferred amongst foragers than others because of flavor, taste, and availability. But a good rule of thumb that I was taught is that if the leaves of the oak tree are pointy or sharper, that usually indicates that it's a red or a black oak. And that means that it's higher in tannins and more bitter tasting. Now, rounded oak leaves indicate that it's probably a sort of white or swamp oak, and they still have tannins, but it's said to have a lot less than red or black oaks, and a much less bitter taste than red or black oaks. Although more tannins means that they store longer. So it's really up to you if you have time in that moment to harvest like white acorns, for example, then it's good to know that processing and consuming them sooner rather than later will help ensure that they don't rot too soon before you're ready to eat them. And it really depends on what climate and zone that you're in, but white oaks generally produce acorns every year, but you'll be in deep competition with squirrels and deer and birds for them. But also generally around late September and October is the best time to harvest acorns because they start falling on the ground. And then it's also said that while some produce acorns every year, generally a really, really good crop of acorns can only be found every 4 up to even 10 years. And you'll want to find a really good stand of oak trees, not just a solitary one, because those don't generally produce as much acorns. And if you want to make, for example, acorn flour, then you're going to want to have at least a few gallons of acorns to do so. And then this picture on the top I found really interesting because these are all acorns that came from the same tree, but you can clearly see the difference in color and the holes in some of them. The holes indicate that a weevil most likely has already eaten the inside of the acorn, so they're no good anymore and can be left alone. And then the picture in the bottom middle shows an acorn infested with a weevil. You can see the little worm in there, and you can clearly see that it's eaten the entire inside. And then any other discolorations you see indicate that they've already been hit with some sort of fungus or rot. So those are spoiled and you can leave those alone as well. And as Ella said, if the cap or the little hat of the acorns are still really strongly attached, that means the tree dropped it before it was ready and there probably isn't much inside. So you also want to check to make sure nothing is growing out of them either, because that means that they're germinating. And they do tend to germinate very quickly when they're on the ground, but they're no good if they're already germinating, so those can be left alone. And another good test is to feel them with your fingers. So if they feel strong and sturdy, then they're good. But if they feel hollow, almost like a ping pong ball, then you know there's probably not much inside. And then if I can draw your attention to the picture on the bottom right-hand side, this shows black oak acorns, and the middle acorn shows a worm tunnel. But the other acorns show healthiness in a pretty stark orange color. And as I said before, red and black oaks generally have more tannins than white oaks, which leads to this really orange color. White and swamp oaks will be more yellow inside. But you want to always start with a test by cracking a few open. And then if they seem fully orange or fully yellow, then you know that they're ready to harvest. If you can go to the next slide, please. So it will take really careful inspection of each acorn when you're harvesting, but it's no worries if you don't catch every single hole or bad acorn. There's a really cool float test that you can conduct when you bring your acorns home to process. So all you do is grab a large container and you fill it with water and you set your acorns in it. And then if any of them float to the top, that means that they're empty inside and they're no good. And then the acorns that stay on the bottom are ready to process. And then the next steps in the process usually includes first drying your acorns. You can set them up to dry in the sun for a few days, or you can put them next to a dry heat area like a wood stove or in an attic. In Minnesota, it's generally a little too humid, I found, to lay things out in the sun, or it just takes a lot longer than I'm used to. But yeah, I would say try to keep it inside if you're in Minnesota, unless you want to wait. It took about 6 days. I remember when I was trying to process acorns instead of the recommended 3 to get them fully dry. And then step 2, you want to crack them open and separate the nut from the shell. And as Ella was talking about, you can use a rock, you can use a hammer, you can crack one at a time, or you can use, what I ended up doing was using a cinder block to just crack a bunch at one time. And if they're dry enough, it's generally pretty easy to remove the nut from the shell. But if they're still really fresh, it's going to be a lot harder to get the nut removed fully. And some people choose to toast them a bit before trying to crack them open. But that's not always necessary. But if you're finding it too hard to remove the shell, then you can try toasting them. And sometimes that makes it a bit easier, but it's not necessary all the time. And then step 3, you want to blend them with either a food processor or a blender. Although if your blender does not have a strong motor, then I would not recommend using your blender. Or you can use rocks or whatever you use to mash things into a flour-like substance. You can use like a mortar and pestle. And then step 4, you want to start leaching them to get rid of the tannins. So you can either choose hot or cold water, but hot water is generally faster. If you're going to make flour out of your acorns, it's said that cold water leaching is better for that because it keeps the starchiness more intact. But either way, you pour your flour-like substance into a jar with hot or cold water, you enclose it with a lid, and then you let them sit. And once you notice that the water is discolored, sometimes this takes a few hours, all the way up to 12 hours, sometimes a full day. But once you notice the discolored water, you dump that water out and you put in fresh water. And you repeat until the water generally stays clear. And depending on the variety of acorn you're working with, this usually takes anywhere from a few days all the way up to 10 days with quite a few water changes. So this part takes a lot of patience and time for sure. And then also while you're doing this process, you'll notice a milky substance will start settling at the top of your jar. And that's actually acorn starch. And it acts a lot like cornstarch. So you can also take that and put that in a separate jar and do the same process. And it will leach just like the acorn flour. Acorn starch is a thickener and it can be used just like cornstarch. And then you can also even save the grittier parts for grits if you like as well with that very same process of just separating them. And then once the water starts to stay clear, you can start taste testing by taking a little pinch. And if it's still bitter, you're going to want to keep soaking it and keep doing the same process because any little amount of bitterness will show up 10 times more in the cooking process. So you want to make sure that it tastes really, really bland. Want to make sure that there's absolutely no flavor whenever you're, and then once there's no flavor, then you know that you're done with this process. As far as getting the acorn flour process started. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So since we're already halfway into making acorn flour, I thought I'd add in here how to do it. So once you're done with the previous process of leaching and you're taste testing the flour and it tastes really bland, then you're just about ready to make the flour. You want to have a very fine mesh cheesecloth, at least a 90 grade. And then you want to squeeze the flour until the water is gone. And then once you're done with that process, you can use the wet acorn flour in many different recipes and store it up to a week in the refrigerator. But if you want to store it longer, then you're going to need to start drying the flour, either in a dehydrator or in the sun for a few days, but making sure that you're turning it over every now and again until it's completely dry. And then it will store in a dry pantry for a few months. But a little bit longer than a few months if you store the dry flour in a refrigerator. And then once you have your flour ready, you now have a gluten-free flour that you can substitute when you see recipes that call for almond flour. And it makes for a good substitute for cornmeal as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. So now that you have acorn flour, you're ready to start using it as an almond flour substitute or cornmeal substitute. But I found that the best way to start when you're first using acorn flour is pancakes. I think that's the easiest, the easiest way. So This is a recipe I found from the Forager Chef, and there's many different acorn flour recipes out there, but this was the only one I could find that had gluten-free flour and dairy-free option. So once you gather all of these ingredients, then you first want to, preheat the oven to 200, sift the corn flour, basically just make sure there's no clumps, toast the acorn flour and cornmeal in a dry skillet, tossing occasionally for a few minutes until it's hot. And then, and then you mix it with the dry ingredients, and then you mix the wet ingredients and beat with the whisk. And then essentially it's just like making pancakes from there. And then you add pine nuts if you want. And then the last piece of advice I think was something I skipped the first time I tried this, but I think it's good advice. You want to transfer the finished pancakes onto a baking sheet in the oven until they're fully cooked. I think, yeah, and I will go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And so unfortunately, I had a really rough time finding any local native traditional food businesses or artists that highlight acorns specifically. But I still wanted to shout out a couple of native-owned businesses that do sell traditional foods and art. And first we have the Cheyenne River Youth Project, and you can order homemade artisanal and traditional foods from them. There's also Tanakina Towi, or Blue Hummingbird Woman. She sells various plant medicinals when it's in season. And then Mino Mishkiki are Good Medicine, and they sell natural foods. And of course, our panelist, Ella Robertson's 13 Moons business as well. I just hope in this, holiday season that's coming up that folks can support Native-owned businesses. And if you're aware of any Indigenous farmers or artists or traditional food sellers that highlight or sell acorns, please let us know, because we'd love to give them a shout out. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. I'm going to hand it back to Louisa.
Thank you, Jen. That was extremely informative. I really loved the images you showed of the variations of what acorns can look like from one tree and then what it looks like on the inside. Because I was a little confused on what do you mean crack it open and pull it apart? So, and then when you said when you said you have to go for bland, which is so counterintuitive. So I'm just going to keep that in mind when I finally get to eat some of these acorns and try it out, which I haven't done so yet, but I'm really excited. Also, if y'all weren't able to screenshot the recipe that Jen shared, again, we are recording this and we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel, as well as you can kind of rewind and go back on Facebook and follow along. Now I'm so excited to turn it over to Gabby Menomin, who is Forest County Potawatomi Community and is our Wakan and Gapi's restoration manager. And she'll be talking more about our ecological roles in kinship of acorns.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Louisa. Hey everyone, me, Gabby Menomin, like Louisa said, I come from the Forest County Potawatomi community. I know that there are some stories and some people back in the day of, elders using acorns, but this is something that has recently come into my life. I kind of ignored oak trees a lot growing up. Didn't have a ton of them growing up where I grew up in southern Wisconsin, but and really funny enough, actually, oak trees are actually one of the tree species that I struggle with the most in terms of identifying between the different species. It's like oak trees and spruce. I really have had a hard time learning them. But don't worry, we're going to walk through some kind of key steps, some things that I've learned along the way to help identify oak trees, which is where acorns come from. So if we want to go to the next slide. So oak trees come from the Fagaceae family or the beech family. Some other beech family relatives related to oak trees here in Minnesota and the Midwest include things like the American beech and the American chestnut, which is kind of, it's a little more east, but you can find a few here in the Midwest as well. But there are over 500 plus species of oak trees in the world and about 180 hybrids of different Quercus species. In Minnesota, we have 6 native oaks. They are the white oak, swamp white oak, northern pin oak, bur oak, and northern red oak, and the black oak as well. And so I just wanted to include some of the different maps on the ranges of the different oak trees, so you can kind of get an idea of where each of these different species grow. Throughout my portion of the presentation, I'm going to be focusing a lot more on the red oak, bur oak, and white oak, which are a little more commonly found here in the Twin Cities. Black oak, you can find it really here in Minnesota. You can really find it in the southeastern corner of the state, but that's a species that grows a little more east of here. So a couple different habitat features of oak trees, and this is I was truly trying to gather my notes and my thoughts for this because when talking about acorns, yes, the acorns is the fruiting structure of oak trees. So trying to kind of talk broadly about each of these species. There's some things that are that kind of broadly describe oak tree species here in Minnesota. And I'll try to along the way point out different specific characteristics of them. But I do want to point that out and try to talk generally about oaks. So kind of some habitat characteristics of oak trees here in Minnesota. They're usually found in deciduous forests. Typically, you'll see them in the wild growing in dominant, they're usually the dominant species in the canopy, but they do like to grow with some other trees. You'll see red oaks kind of growing alongside sugar maples in some areas. Bur oaks will like to grow in kind of more that the prairie conditions, where you'll see a lot more like tall grasses, flowers, things like that. But generally speaking, you'll find them in deciduous forests. They don't mix too much with coniferous species. You also, of course, find them in the oak savannas and along riverbanks as well, especially some of the more wetter species like the swamp white oak. And then generally speaking, oak trees like pretty well-drained soil, but they can, depending on the species, some of them like really dry, well-drained soil, some of them like a little bit moister conditions. So like bur oak, you'll find those in generally very dry conditions, but that swamp white oak, like I said, that likes to grow along riverbanks, you'll see that in kind of the wetter, well-drained soils. So oak trees can grow in a lot of different bearing conditions. You'll see them a lot planted in urban areas because they can handle a lot of those different urban conditions as well. If we want to go to the next slide. So some general identification characteristics of oak trees. The flowers are going to be these small yellow-green catkins. I wanted to show a picture of it here because not everyone knows what a catkin looks like. And you'll find these in the spring generally. The leaves of oak trees are going to have an alternate arrangement. So, on the stem, they're not going to be straight across from each other like a opposite arrangement. They're going to be kind of staggered, almost like steps going up the stem. And also with oak trees, their leaves are lobed shaped. So we'll get into the different leaves in a little bit here. The growth form of oak trees, they're generally at their max potential, they can get up to 100 feet tall, but usually, generally speaking, they're going to be about 50 to 80 feet tall. And especially when you can get them in a little bit less crowded conditions, they're going to have these really beautiful, broad, expanding canopies. When you get them in more crowded conditions, like some of the red oak stands up north, you'll see them have less expanding canopies, but generally they will have a larger canopy compared to some other trees. And oak trees are a very long-living species. They can live several hundred years old, and because they can live to be so old, they're a fairly slow-growing tree as well. So that's something to consider if you wanted to plant an oak tree in your yard. It's going to take a really long time for that oak tree to reach maturity and become a really large, beautiful part of the landscape. And then another key characteristic with oak trees is that their fruit is acorns. So you'll find the acorns in as single or in pairs as well, and they'll have those cup-shaped caps on them. And they're usually ready and mature in the fall. And depending on the species, they'll differ in size, color. Their caps might sometimes have these little fringes, or they might be more scaly. We'll get into that a little bit on the next slide if we want to go to the next slide. And then the other thing I wanted to reiterate also, Jenna talked about this, but oak trees have bumper crops, which is essentially, years where they have a very large mass of acorns that they produce. Some trees can, continue to produce acorns every year, but, sometimes they can be pretty sparse. Sometimes the trees might not even produce any acorns between that time. But generally speaking, the average bumper crop cycle is anywhere from 3 to 5 years, but it can get up to 10 years with some species or some individuals. And I wanted to kind of point out the difference between this quote unquote red oak and quote unquote white oaks. So basically the biggest difference between red oaks and white oaks is going to be their level of tannins and the shape of the lobes as well. The white oak species, which you'll see on the left-hand side, include bur oak, the white oak, and then the swamp white oak. So these are going to have rounded lobes. You can see that the outside of the leaf, they're rounded on the outside on each lobe. Whereas the red oak species, including the northern pin oak, red oak, and black oak, they're going to have very sharp pointed leaf margins and lobes as well. And then, white oaks have the lower levels of tannins. Generally speaking, they're usually sweeter acorns, and red oaks have usually have the higher levels of tannins and are kind of more of those bitter acorns. If we want to go to the next slide. So now I wanted to get into kind of the kinship roles that oak trees play with wildlife and within their ecosystems that they live in. So kinship roles that they share with wildlife, the acorns, of course, are really the key thing for wildlife. They are a really important food source that many different animals rely on. I'll just go through kind of the pictures that we have here. And I try to get pictures of some of these little critters that have acorns in their mouths because things like the wood duck here at top, I did not know that wood ducks ate acorns, but you can see in his mouth, he's got a little acorn in there. And then turkeys love to forage on acorns as well. Downy woodpeckers and hairy woodpeckers also will forage on acorns. Blue jays absolutely love acorns. I have seen blue jays actually fighting squirrels and deer for acorns. They're pretty feisty little birds. And then at the bottom right-hand side, we have a flying squirrel. So these are another species that really love acorns. And then some other animals that will also forage on acorns include things like bears, chipmunks, squirrels, mice, raccoons. And there's even been known cases of coyotes and pine martens actually eating acorns as well, just because they're so nutrient packed and they have so much protein. They're a really great nutrition source for a lot of different animals. And then let's see, another kinship role that oaks play with, that oaks have with wildlife is that the leaves and twigs are used as a forage for deer and other insects. There's quite a number of different burrowing insect type species, little weevils, beetles, sap-sucking beetles, things like that rely on twigs and the actual oak tree trunk itself for a food source and protection as well. And then cover and nesting for a lot of different bird species, small mammals, shelter for larger species as well, just because those branches can get so large and expansive, especially in the summer. They provide really amazing shade, which can provide cooling opportunities for wildlife. And then something else that really surprised me was that oak trees are really important for pollinator species too. There's, up to 500 different species of butterflies and moths that rely on oak trees for pollination, for shelter, for just general habitat to live on. And so this is really kind of unique as a tree species. So the Quercus genus is actually pretty unique in that it offers the most kind of pollinator habitat compared to other tree genus species. So that I wanted to point that out because I thought that was really cool, and I was really surprised when I read about that. If we want to go to the next slide. So now I wanted to talk about some of the ecological kinship roles that oaks have with just the broader ecosystems that they live in. So really the biggest thing I want to share with you guys is that oak species, generally speaking across the board, are a keystone species. So they are really kind of the central kind of backbone of a lot of different ecosystems that they make up, just because they have so many different important wildlife roles, but then also ecological roles as well with the broader environment. So oak trees are really great for soil stabilization and erosion control. You can kind of see in that picture at the bottom right just how expansive and dense the root systems can be. And then oak trees are also amazing carbon sinks as well. They're really great at sequestering carbon. Generally speaking, it's the older, larger oak trees that are able to make kind of the biggest difference in carbon sequestration in the habitats that they live in. And this is also really a key characteristic of those slower growing tree species as well, because they're able to have mechanisms as they're slowly growing to be able to take in a lot of carbon from the air around them and be able to store it in their roots and store it back into the soil as well. And then oak trees, especially, I really want to highlight bur oak as well. And you can see this in the upper right hand photo, but are really important in fire dependent habitats as well. Bur oaks, especially in oak savanna conditions. Oak savannas are a fire dependent ecosystem, and the bur oak are really kind of the key and dominant tree species that grow within those. They have mechanisms like their thick bark and their ability to readily resprout if severely damaged, where it makes them really perfect for these fire-dependent habitats. And then also oak trees are an amazing fungal host as well. There's a ton of different mushrooms and fungus that live with and grow from oak trees. So I just wanted to highlight three down here at the bottom. The one on the left is a type of oyster mushroom. So you'll see oysters, mushrooms growing on a lot of oak trees, usually when they're dead. You'll see chicken of the woods as well growing on oak trees. That's the middle picture. But be aware there is a very similar lookalike called jack-o'-lantern that is extremely poisonous. I just want to point that out. It looks very, very similar to that chicken of the woods. And then lion's mane also is very commonly found on oak trees as well. All right, if we want to go to the next slide. And then I just wanted to kind of close out my portion of the webinar talking about some threats to oak trees. So the biggest threat that you'll find for oak trees, especially here in Minnesota, is a fungal disease called oak wilt disease. And so this is a disease that spreads through root grafts and by beetles as well. There's two species of beetles. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce their Latin names, but their Latin names are there on that list, that are really kind of the major hosts for spreading this oak wilt. And what I mean by this disease spreads through root grafts. So you'll find this especially in a lot of the kind of red oak dominated stands, where it's almost like a monoculture of oak trees, but you get those really dense stands of oaks, and their root systems are actually connected and fused with each other underground. And so it's really easy for those trees to spread disease between them. One thing that I learned in school with how to manage oak wilt is that you really, once you have one tree that gets it, you want to try to get it out of the system as fast as possible. So this not only means that you're chopping the tree down, but you're also going into the soil and disconnecting the the root system of the diseased tree from the healthy trees around it. And then you have to take those and burn them. Otherwise, that fungus disease will continue to spread. But some symptoms of oak wilt, generally speaking, you'll see the leaves, they'll become wilted, they'll turn red really, really early in the summer. And kind of a key characteristic for that red color that it turns is that it'll still be kind of green in the middle or along the leaf veins throughout the oak leaf, and really red on the outside. And so I also wanted to point out the picture of the tree with oak wilt. So oak wilt is pretty distinguishable in a canopy because it starts from the top and works its way down. I think there's another oak disease. I can't remember if it's verticillium wilt or if it's sudden oak death that does the opposite, where the leaf dying starts from the bottom and works its way up. But oak wilt will start at the top and go down as the infection continues to spread throughout the tree. Other threats to oak trees include invasive species, specifically buckthorn. So buckthorn is a really big problem in a lot of different oak stands, but it's really a very awful problem in bur oak stands and red oak stands as well. You can see a picture here at the bottom, in the middle. All that green that you see in the understory is buckthorn. And so what buckthorn does to oak trees is they outcompete the little oak saplings that are trying to come through in the understory. So buckthorn is a really huge problem, but fortunately, especially in the bur oak stands, there is a great buckthorn management method, and that is the prescription burns as well. There's specific, temperatures or intensities of burns that you're supposed to do for depending on the level of buckthorn invasion. Prescription burns are really great for getting those large and small buckthorn bushes out of oak stands. And then lastly, pests are also a huge problem with oak trees. I mentioned the two beetles, which are sap-sucking beetles that help spread the oak wilt disease. But there's also other invasive species such as the gypsy moth, which are really huge defoliators of oak trees. I think oaks are one of their preferred species besides the maple trees. So gypsy moths will go after oak trees and defoliate, which can affect their health and growth, and eventually will kind of choke out the tree until it dies. There's also oak borers that can get into the inner bark, the cambium layer of the oak tree, and if there's a bad enough infestation, it can actually end up girdling the tree from the inside out. And then of course there's acorn weevils. So I showed a picture of one type of acorn weevil down at the bottom, that photo. I think they're kind of cute, but they do damage the acorns, so that affects the germination and regeneration rates of oak trees. If you're not having healthy acorns that are able to germinate because of acorn weevil infestations, you're not going to have regrowth in the understory. So I think that is all that I have. And I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but I'll turn it back over to Louisa.
Wow, thank you, Gabby. I am always in awe of how much you know, and holy cow, I wonder why you struggle to know all of the Quercus species. There's over 500. Like, give yourself some grace. It's okay. But yeah, we're now in our questions time frame here with us this evening. I think we only have one question here posed in our Q&A, and we haven't seen any posed in our Facebook yet. But if you have them, send them in real quick, and we might be able to get to them before we end out our evening tonight. So I'll just read out the question that we have in our Q&A, and let's see, and I'll have Ella respond out to all of our listeners. So we had some questions about tannin use, whether it's like tannins in the water and how it can reduce inflammation. And the questions, were posed to Ella to share a little bit more about how can you use tannin infused water, and as well as how to help reduce that inflammation.
I think without adding any type of preservatives, the best way to use the fresh tannin, like say you had just soaked the acorns and got the tannin water, is by preserving it in the fridge, which it would probably be good for a few days. And um, purchasing a spray bottle, you could spray it on directly to your affected areas, or like a poultice. I imagine if you wanted to soak gauze or rag in that and hold it onto the area, that both those methods would work.
Thank you. And this is a question for you all. Has anyone done any taste tests between the different species or different maturities?
Mine is pretty limited as far as taste testing. Like if you looked on the map, I only have bur oak in my area. I saw Minnesota, Wisconsin over in that area. You have a few varieties.
Yeah, I've only ever personally worked with red oak before, hoping to try bur oak out one of these seasons, but yeah, I'm not too sure about the difference in taste between different species.
Now we have to share.
Yeah, for me, I've tried both bur and white oak, and I would say bur oaks I liked a little better, and as far as taste.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm now curious what kind of oak tree I have in my yard, although it's not surrounded by a bunch of other oak trees, so I'm not sure how good it is. But as soon as we identified acorn as our plant that we're celebrating at this webinar, I went to my yard. I'm like, dang it, squirrels already up to them. So it was a competition out there. So yeah, I think that, let me just double check. Wrap on all my devices here. Yeah, it looks like that wraps up our questions, and I know we're a little over time, so I wanted to say miigwech to all of our speaker educators this evening, and wopita to all of you who listened tonight and attended, and for supporting Wakan Tipi Hawaiian Gapi. One thing that would really help us give back to us is filling out that survey about our event this evening. As soon as you close out of the webinar, a survey link will pop up for you to complete. And while it's fresh on your mind, it'd be great if you completed that. And those of you who are joining via Facebook, the link is already in the comments. So please help us out and complete those survey questions for us, and take a couple minutes out of the rest of your evening. But I'm so thankful for you all for sharing about, I think one thing that just resonated with me that Ella reminded me of like teachings that we get is that we didn't used to have these nutritional facts for some of these plants, and we felt it in our bodies, and we paid attention to it. And so that just reminded me of how much we need to pay attention still to those things even. Yeah. So thank you, Ella, for that, and how much patience and persistence it takes to harvest traditional foods. So that was like, oh gosh, yeah, you're right. It is hard. It's hard. It's really hard. And I'm so glad we work here and we get to try out different things. I mean, we just harvested wrapped potatoes last week, so I'm excited, and I learned how hard and muddy and dirty it was. And so I'm learning, and I can't wait to learn more. So thank you, Jen, Gabby, and Ella, as well as our interpreter, Angela. It was so great to have you all this evening, and I hope you have a great rest of your night.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, ladies, for sharing all the information. I learned something new today.
Take care. We'll see you all.